Okay, so I want to thank you guys for coming and making the time to be here for this. So the winter training, what I'd like to do in the future coming up, we always have something in the fall that's like an orientation meeting for volunteers. And then I want to do something winter, something spring each year is what I'm going to try to do. So I want people to start to think about other topics that they might be interested in terms of training. I'm also on the state volunteer committee. So we're working on an outline of quarterly trainings. Whether or not I would use all 4 in a year, I don't know, but it probably at least 3. So I could use that, or if there are specific things that my volunteers want to know about, I can tailor to that. But one of the things that is universal and important for volunteers is understanding ages and stages of youth development, because as a leader, you've got kids all the way from kindergarten, our minis, through seniors in high school. And that's a huge age range when you're trying to do activities for your club and engage all of those kids. So it's important to understand the development of the different stages and how you can help tailor your meetings, your activities, the things that you're doing to kids and engage all kids at all age levels. So that's kind of why we're doing this one first. So all things Owen County 4-H need to support the mission and vision of Indiana 4-H. And I'm sure you guys have seen this before. I know I've had it involved in trainings I've done before, but I just wanted to remind you about the mission and vision of Indiana 4-H, that we provide real life educational opportunities to develop young people to positively impact their community and world. And we do that by engaging them in, like it says here, hands-on kind of activities and to be leaders in their community and to reach that full potential. For each meetings, we want to think about the purpose and the structure and how we're going to engage all ages. In this training, we're going to focus on that last one, keeping youth of all ages engaged. But what I'd like you guys to do right now is kind of think about the other two just as a lead-in to that third one. So what do you all see as the purpose of a 4-H meeting, whether that be your general club or project club? What's the purpose of meeting? Feel free to pop in. Don't all jump at once. Right? Well, okay, so we try to do regular meetings, right? So what kinds of things are you trying to make sure happen at that? Think about the fact that we've got to get information out to these kids, right? So one of the purposes is kind of a business related part of the meeting. So when things are due, when deadlines are, what the rules would be for projects, what skills you're trying to learn, that kind of thing. Another purpose is to build those skills, right? So we're going to do some educational things in a meeting. And then a big purpose of a 4-H meeting is that a fellowship with one another. So the kids get to have that chance to be with each other, maybe meet new people, and get to work and play together so that they're learning to interact. So that leads right into the structure and what we typically think, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but a lot of times new leaders just want a little guidance on, okay, how do I structure this 4-H meeting? So we kind of think of it in thirds, right? Where each of those elements I just talked about maybe are about a third of your meeting. So if you want to keep your meeting to an hour, it'd be 20 minutes of business type stuff, 20 minutes of fun kind of games, icebreakers, that kind of thing. And 20 minutes of maybe a business kind of thing. I'm sorry, I already said that one at the beginning, but educational. So maybe like a demonstration, maybe a lesson of some sort. And sometimes those things can incorporate all of those, right? Sometimes you've got lessons that have elements of all of those things involved. So that's very basic. Nobody is coming out there and grading you on how you're running your meetings, you know. So if you end up doing more of one thing or less of one thing or something else totally, that's okay. All right. So like I said, we're going to talk specifically about the ages and stages. So how are we keeping all of our youth engaged? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share in the chat box here in a minute, this Google Jamboard link. So I don't know if any of you have ever used it or if you guys have access. If you're on your phone, it might be a little tricky going back and forth. So don't worry about that. I'll share the screen. But I will have it open so you can go to it and add to it later if you want. And those of you that are watching this in the recorded version, you can use that link right there. I don't know if you can copy it directly from the recorded version, but you at least have it and can get on to that Jamboard and add to our drawings. And this is just to kind of make this a little more interactive. So what I want to do first, I'm going to stop sharing this part, and I'm going to try to share my Jamboard part. Okay, so if you click on that link, oh, hang on, because I am going to just copy the link right now and put it in the chat box for you. So hang on for just a second. And I will do that. So there's the link in the chat box for you. I need to. Where'd my Jamboard go? I just had it. There it is. It moved around like my little windows. Okay. All right. So can you see the screen that's got my very lovely, and you can't, I don't know why it's not showing for you. But Terry and Brandy, can you see my screen that has the unusual looking gingerbread type outline man? Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna, I don't know if you can, yeah, if you want to come over here, you can. So he's got one arm that's a lot bigger than the other.
That's okay.
So what I'd like you guys to do, whether you're on here live or whether you're watching this recorded, is come in here. If you have that link, you can get to this Jamboard. I opened it up so that anyone with the link can get on here. So this is the board for 5 to 8 year olds. That's the first stage we're going to talk about. So when we're talking about the different characteristics we need to know about in the different stages, we want to think about physical growth. We want to think about their cognitive growth or their thinking. And we want to talk about their social growth and their emotional growth. So when we're talking about 5 to 8 year olds, what kind of characteristics physically do these kiddos have? And we can either draw on here or we can do the little sticky notes. I'm a big fan of the sticky notes, by the way, or just write on here some different things. So if you're on there, I saw somebody's popped on there, so I don't know if that's Brandy or if it's Terry, but 5 to 8 year olds, what would be some physical characteristics of a typical 5 to 8 year old? I'm going to draw, so I'm going to draw their fingers, right? Look at how good those fingers are, you guys. And it's kind of characteristic of this age because their fine motor skills aren't very developed at this age. So in this gingerbread looking man, the fact that I just drew little lines and it looks like it's one finger all together is kind of representative of the fact that they don't have a lot of fine motor control, right? So they're not doing a whole lot of, fine type work with their physically. So this is kind of a representation of that, if that makes sense. We might, so if I wanted to use a sticky note, I might say, what about their thinking? What is the typical, what are some typical characteristics intellectually for 5 to 8-year-olds? So if you think about those kids in that age group, they're very concrete, right? Concrete thinking. They don't do a lot of abstract stuff. You've got to be pretty literal with these kids. So that might be an example. And I'm not going to do a lot here. We'll just do 1 or 2. And I like to make my little sticky note turn. So that might be one. How about socially? Can we think of any characteristics of social growth for this age group, 5 to 8?
Socializing with other kids.
Yeah. So this actually might be the first time they have a chance to do a lot of socializing with their peers, right? If this is 5 to 8, it's the first time they're going to school, maybe. I mean, you've got some kids going to preschool. You've got a lot of kids that have been in play groups and stuff as pre-Ks. But for a lot of them, they don't get a lot of that. This is going to be the first time, for instance, a kindergartner, if they're going to all-day kindergarten, has been out of their own home that long with that many other kids to socialize. So you've got maybe the first time that they are doing a lot of group activities, right? So I'm going to say new to group activities. Okay, and how about emotionally, 5 to 8-year-olds? Can you think of a characteristic emotionally that's common with this age group? Do they care about what other people feel? Not really. They don't care a whole lot about how other people feel. Investment in other people's feelings. That's not exactly how I want to say it, but okay, but this is just an example of the kinds of things that with this activity, if you want to come and do this later and add to our little guy, and then, like I said, any of you that are watching this recorded, come here and add some things onto this diagram. You can add drawing to it. You can put the sticky notes on. You can write right on it with the pen features in Jamboard. Whatever you want to do, but I'd love to see what else we end up with here. Okay, so we're going to go back pretty quickly to the PowerPoint share. Okay, and move forward. So we just talked about 5 to 8-year-olds in our activity. So I wanted to kind of list out for you some more examples, some more specifics about things that 5 to 8 year olds that are characteristic of 5 to 8 year olds. I'm going to stop for just a second here just to insert something that I'm sure you all know and are aware of, but make sure you're remembering this when you're working with groups of kids. Not all kids who are 5 to 8 are going to fit exactly into these generalized characteristics, right? These are very generalized. Not every 5 to 8 year old is going to have these or act this way or whatnot. Some are going to be more advanced, some are going to be a little more grown up, and some are going to be less. And a lot of times that's going to depend on a lot of different factors. And not the least of which is going to be, we do have some kids in our program with some cognitive delays. So we want to make sure we're paying attention to this. So especially, I know we have some older kids in our program with cognitive delays. And so they might be not necessarily, they might even be at this 5 to 8 year old stage, but more in that next, the 9 to 12 and the 12 to, 14, they might act younger than their actual age. So sometimes we got to remember that we will have some of those situations as well. So, I think I went too far. I think I went one too far here. So the 5 to 8 year olds are learning to master those physical skills. We kind of talked about that with their, when we talked about their motor skills. So those gross motor skills are going to be more apparent than those fine motor skills. That they do fight, but it doesn't last very long because they just move on, right? It's not usually anything, any big deal. Boys and girls are still playing together at the beginning of this stage, but by the end of this stage, a lot of times they've divided off, right? Not always, but that's kind of the typical. Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So I was talking about just the fact that these are not nice, neat little categories, that we will have kids that are 9 or 10 year olds that might still be in this stage, or, other way around. As we get to the older stage, we might have younger kids that display some of those older kid characteristics as well. So they're very generalized, and I don't want to make any assumptions about any child. So we want to make sure we get to know them. But this just gives you some ideas generally. So you can see there some of the other characteristics, and what are the implications of that? So the biggest things are, it's going to get messy, right, with kids this age. So we want to make sure that when we're doing activities or crafts or food things, that we're okay with that, and things that maybe actually encourage that, some fun stuff. Edible engineering is a great activity for these kids, because they can take it and put it together and make it all messy, and then they can eat it if they want, right? We want a lot of activities that are encouraging that large muscle use, because their gross motor skills are easier for them to use at this point. But there's also a place for encouraging them to start to develop those fine motor skills. Role playing is a great one at this age. They like to play pretend, and so that can be fun for them. Trying to do some things with all of the genders together, planning activities that promote success. So they don't like, and it's not necessarily that they don't like, but a lot of times they don't even think about success the way we as grown-ups think about success. So think about what that looks like. Because it's more about the journey than the destination for them. So things that are going to allow them to continue to tweak whatever it is they're working on. And sometimes that means it's hard. And that's why mini 4-H is kind of set up the way it is. It allows them a lot of flexibility. You don't necessarily have to do A before B before C. They can create what they want to create and be good with it. And they can add stuff to their picture or their project or their whatever they want to do as they're bringing it into the fair. We're okay with that. Short activities are important. What I was just talking about, focus on the process, not the final product, and be positive, right? So those are some of the implications for this stage. On into 9 to 12, and this is where we would have like tried to think of some of these on our own before I showed you the screen, putting them on that little gingerbread man that I made on the Jamboard. But we're going to just go ahead and go through some of these. So 9 to 12, they don't sit still very well still, right? Those girls are maturing a lot faster than those boys, right? They're joining clubs or creating groups, primarily girls and boys, you know, all girls, all boys, but not always. Again, these are generalizations. They like to please grown-ups, right? So they will try to, you know, successfully complete a project or do something well, and they want to show off their success. They see themselves more as part of the group than that individual identity at this point. They're defining themselves by their group. So that's what that means when it says weak sense of individual identity. They become moody. Any of you that have had 9 to 12-year-olds know this. They like to feel like they're part of something important. This is about the time when they start to question that authority, but they still want and need that guidance. And they still pretty much are thinking pretty concretely, but this is also the stage where they start to think a little more abstractly and understand more of those new kinds of concepts and ideas. And they want to find their own solutions, right? So when we're doing activities, what's that mean for us as leaders?
We need to let them explore things and not just stand and provide all the answers.
Right, right. And sometimes that's hard as an adult because we like to think we know what it should look like, but sometimes we learn stuff too, don't we? Like if we let them come find their own way, sometimes we find a new way too, that maybe we didn't know. So that's a lot of fun. So this is kind of what we're talking about on this next slide. So these are the implications. So what do all those things mean for us? We want to make sure we are providing those active learning experiences, letting them find their own way. Simple, short directions. They're wanting to do this as a learning experience, right? They want to do this as a hands-on. Offering that wide range of activities so that they can find where they're going to be successful, because remember, this success is important to them. And we don't want to have that competing. And this says, so I copied this from some other stuff, and I almost changed this as I put it on, because I don't think it's just avoiding competition between boys and girls. I think it's avoiding competition, period, on this. But I left it there. And we want to encourage the older youth as mentors. So as they start to get older, they can start mentoring at this, you know, later on in this stage, helping those younger kids with things, helping them identify their strengths. And we don't want to compare them to each other. And we, again, want to emphasize the progress made. So again, these kiddos are really looking to please those adults, right? So what else? What have you guys, what other things would you guys add to this? Is there anything that you have noticed either as a club leader, as a volunteer, or as a parent, things that you've noticed? All right. All right, so the next stage we're going to talk about is 13 to 15. Again, we would probably have kind of tried to go through this on our own, thinking of the things that we already have in our heads about what we know about 13, 15-year-olds. But here's a list of typical characteristics for those kids in this age group. So the 13 to 15-year-olds. So physically, so if we start thinking about it by those 4 categories when we were doing the Jamboard outlines, right? I said we wanted to talk about what it looks like physically, what it looks like cognitively, or how they're thinking. We want to think about what it looks like socially and what it looks like emotionally, right? So there's a lot of physical stuff going on in this age group. And especially we're going to see this because as in girls, because they're maturing physically a lot sooner than those boys typically, again, remember. So there's going to be a lot of physical changes in this age group, which affects those other things, right? I mean, think about how the physical changes in a girl's body are affecting how she feels emotionally or how she feels socially, because she's busy comparing herself to other girls a lot of times. And the same can be said for boys too. It's just that we see that a lot sooner in girls, especially in this age range. So this is where they're starting to get a little more interested though in that opposite sex, right? So they're looking at more activities that they can do with the opposite sex, and they're looking more to their peers than their parents. This is where they're starting to separate a little more from their parents. They're searching for other adult role models other than their parents, right? And they tend to reject the solutions. This is very similar to what we already kind of talked about with the younger kids, but they a lot of times downright reject a solution. So not only should we not, right, just hover over their shoulder, tell them exactly what they do, what to do, but at this point, they're probably going to reject that anyway, right? And try to do their own thing. And again, we talked about comparing themselves to others, and that whole hello middle school, right? That unsettled emotions. I was a middle school counselor for 4 years, and it takes a special person to deal with that full time. It's a challenge because those emotions are all over the place. They're wanting to learn to be independent, but they still want and need their parents' help. They may not say that right out loud, but they do want that. And they're learning more about the abstract thinking, ready for that in-depth long-term experience. So what implications? So we want to make sure that we are talking about that physical stuff and how closely tied to their emotional and social aspects. We definitely want to avoid any kind of comments that criticize or compare their physical attributes to each other. And that's really hard, because I think one of the things that's very common and you wouldn't think is, oh, hey, your hair looks great today, and that might not be the best thing to say to a 14-year-old girl who thinks she had a bad hair day and her best friend is, got a great hair day, that may not be the best thing. Involve young teens in setting the rules and planning activities. So this is where they can really start to be part of the leadership in your club, right? They can definitely get in there and start planning some of this stuff. Accept those feelings and be careful not to criticize. And again, this is a hard one because we know, right? As adults, we've lived through a lot of things, and we know that this is just gonna probably be okay. But for them, we need to let them have those feelings and not criticize or not tell them they're wrong or not tell them that it's gonna be, they don't need to worry about it because they are worrying about it. Help them explore their identity, values, and beliefs, because as we talked about on that previous slide, this is where they start to question some of that stuff and want to learn more about different things. Encourage youth and adults working together. So this is a great opportunity, not just for working with their older peers, but also working with adults and being able to work together on things. Giving them some of that decision-making power is really important at this point. And partnered with that, having them evaluate those outcomes. Is this what they were looking for? What really happened? What maybe surprised them? And what can they take and learn from that? Moving on. That service learning component, we've got so many. The kids at this age are great at service learning. They want it, they do it, they enjoy it. So this is something that's really exciting for them at this point. Encourage those learning experiences where they can have some self-discovery and getting along with others and all that kind of stuff. And then I kind of like this last one, be patient with grooming behaviors. Yeah. Yeah, it's important to brush your hair. So that's kind of fun. All right. And then that last group, the 16 to 18-year-olds. So they're very concerned about that body image, right? So physically, I'm still very concerned about that body image. They tend to have realistic views of the limits that they have. At this age, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they're capable of making those commitments and capable of following through, right? So some of the younger kids, they want to make that commitment, but they might not be quite ready for that. They don't have that forward thinking to know exactly what it's going to take. But at this point, they're capable of doing that. They want respect. They want adult leadership roles. They want to have some of that responsibility. And this is where we can allow them to do that. This is why we like to make sure that we as leaders are allowing our youth leaders to have the bulk of the control in meetings. Your officers should be the ones leading your meetings in a regular club. Project clubs, sometimes that's hard if you don't, because I know some of the project clubs don't bother with officers, and that's fine. Maybe the whole group as a group can share some of that. A lot of times they're not going to take the goals set by others. So we want them to identify their own goals and what that means. So they're choosing their own projects. They're choosing their own goals of what they want to see when they are working on a project. They like to try to do that themselves. They're accepting themselves as a unique person, but they still want that peer approval. Developing their own set of values. So this is continuing from the stage before, and they can do a lot on their own. So they can start and carry out a lot of tasks without too much supervision. And this is where junior leaders is a great example of a group that can do their own planning and carry out their own tasks without too much adult interaction. And they're starting to really get the hang of this abstract thinking thing, right? They're really starting to be able to do that. They can imagine an impact of present behavior on future. And they're going to lose that patience with meaningless activities. They're not going to have a lot of patience with it. And I can speak from experience with my own 16 to 18-year-olds, right? They want some meaning in what they're doing. So what's that mean to us as leaders? What kind of implications does that have? So again, we're trying to avoid that, the comments that might criticize or compare the youth. We want to set a good example, because I like this one, because, it mentioned that they tend to push away goals set by somebody else or want to do their own thing, but they're still, even as a 16 to 18-year-old, looking to us to see what we're doing. And that's how we can lead, right? By example. So rather than telling them what to do or setting out a set of rules for them, if we're following that example ourselves, then that is something that can help lead them in the right direction. And that's really a huge part of being a leader or an adult volunteer in 4-H. Let them plan their own programs. It may not be what you want. It may not be the idea you have, but they can do it. And sometimes it's hard because especially if you have a smaller club, some of them might still be hesitant to throw stuff on the table as far as ideas that they have, or really try to encourage them to find ideas that they can run with. We want to let them assume responsibility, and we need to expect them to follow through, right? Do they always? No, they don't. But we need to expect that, and we need to encourage that, and we need to try to support them following through on that, but not do it for them, right? And establish that climate that's conducive to peer support. And again, I took a lot of this information from a different document, so I'm not exactly sure where this author was going with that one, but what I read that as is you want to have that safe and welcoming environment with their peers, because you're going to have some peers that might tend to, with bullying behavior, for instance, and we don't want to tolerate that kind of thing. We want to encourage them to be supportive of each other. Emphasize that personal development and leadership and developing those individual skills. And again, here's just like the last one, youth and adults working together. So for instance, the junior superintendent program that we've had in the past with the barn superintendents. Last year, I really worked with those adult barn superintendents on you've got to communicate with your youth superintendent. And that's hard sometimes because we've always been, well, do it this way, do it that way. I'm asking you to do. You've got to communicate with those young people and work on those partnerships, youth and adult, and really a lot of great stuff can be done. And we had some great success with that at Fair last year. Real life problems to solve. So real things that they can, that maybe they're concerned about and can offer some real solutions to. And this, for instance, is where I'm really trying to get civic engagement off the ground and get kids involved in some of these things. We did not have our courthouse tour this week because we had a lot of illness and we had some schedule conflicts with some people. So Anton Neff, Kelsey Hamlin, and I decided we were going to go ahead and cancel that for Tuesday, and we're going to do it I think March 1st is what we decided. And I would love to have a good number of kids come to that courthouse tour to just get their feet wet on what it means to be involved in that kind of thing in your community. So they have a voice. If there are things in this community that they're concerned about, they need to start to understand how they make the changes that they eventually want to see. And this is where it starts. Encourage that service learning. Again, they like to do that. And with this age, especially, career exploration activities are important. So I would encourage you as leaders to always have some sort of tag onto whatever lesson you're doing or demonstration that you're doing about how the skills related to that can relate to a future career. Because especially for this group, they're really starting to think about that. And these are the kids that are looking at going off to college next year or 2 years from now or 3 years from now. And it's intimidating to them to think about that. So if we can plant little seeds of, hey, the skills you learn in public speaking can really help you in a career in business, can really help you in a career in teaching, can really help you in a career in the medical field where you're working with patients. So whatever it is, if you can tie those skills to some sort of career path, that's always helpful, especially for this age group. I have talked a ton. I don't have a whole lot more as far as slides. I've got a few questions that we'll go over, but what do you guys have? What comments do you have? Think about things that have been going on in your club meetings. And what knowing a little more or being a little more mindful of their ages and stages is going to help you do in your meetings. So if you look here, so talking about ages and stages and all the different things in child development, why is it important that we understand this kind of thing? And as I told Amber before we started, this, and I'm sure all of you that are on the call right now, and most of you, if not all of you that are going to watch this later, none of these things we've talked about come as big surprises to you, right? You all have been dealing as leaders with kids of all ages. Many of you are parents. So none of this is a big surprise, but I think why we want to make sure we put it in front of you is that we remain mindful and don't kind of slip into thinking, oh, I'm going to do this activity and we've got to do it this way because we've got to reach this goal kind of thing, because you're going to have, 6, 7, 8-year-olds that are in, first, second grade in the same room doing activities together with kids that are, 14, 15, 16 years old. So it's really important as we're planning those activities to remain mindful of, okay, how is this activity going to work with an 8-year-old and a 14-year-old doing the same activity? And it's sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it's not nearly as hard as we think it's going to be. So I think, and I put this picture in here because this is a picture from a couple years ago when I was working with some of the peer mentor kids. Because these are older 4-Hers that we're working with younger 4-Hers. And I put it on this slide to just kind of give you a visual of that these kids can do these things together. So kids of different ages can have activities together that they're each going to get something out of. They all got something out of this activity together. And it just might not be the same thing, or it might not be at the same level. But if you can find activities that you can break down into different things for different kids, then that's going to be awesome. Because we want to think about how we can incorporate all the different youth at different ages, and as I mentioned, different abilities into what we're doing. We don't want anybody to feel left out. Recently I've had a lot of conversations with some volunteers about making sure that all the youth that come to our meetings and all the youth that come to our events, whether it be, more business type thing or just something for fun, that they all feel safe, number one, and they all feel welcome and involved. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but we need to think about that, because you guys, I don't want you feeling bad if you've got a kid that comes to your meeting and regularly just sits and doesn't interact, because you're not going to get everybody, and that might be the way they're comfortable, right? They might be okay with that. So I don't want you to feel like that's any kind of failure if you can't get them to, toss the ball when you're doing this little web activity in a circle, or you can't get them to participate when you're asking for some feedback on something, because just being there might be good for them. That might be what they want. But it's always good to encourage, right? To encourage them to participate. Never stop trying, and see if we can see what we can do to reach all those kids. That's the end of the PowerPoint that I have for you. Or just random thoughts do you all have?
I think this is Jenny Hess. My club that I lead is a project club, the Cat Club. And I think part of my struggle is I feel this big responsibility that this is a project club. They're doing this project and I want them to be really ready and prepared to do their cat poster or to present their cat at the show and know all the things that they need to know for the cat knowledge test. And so I really struggle with, how much is it me teaching over, them doing an activity. And I try and break it up at each meeting, but that's just something personally. I don't know if other people struggle with that, but that's something I struggle with, because I don't want to be standing there, monopolizing the meeting. And I really try and have, if there's something I want to show, I try and have an older member or somebody who's done the project before show. But I don't know, that's just a personal struggle I have, and to find a balance with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What thoughts do the rest of you have on that? Because I totally get that, because I'm kind of like you are, Jenny, that naturally I want to, I want to present it and hear, and make sure that they're working towards a goal. But again, we need to make sure we're being cognizant of that, all the different ages and where they are. Did you have something?
I was gonna say, this is Amber Curtis, and Jenny, I think you do just fine at the meetings because I'm always there too. So, but no, I feel the same way with Garden Club, trying to help kids do a project and then nobody even shows or turns them in, or just trying to get growth. I don't know how to bring in kids that want to learn or stick with it is the other problem. So,
yeah. Terry or Brandy, do you have anything you want to add? Excuse me.
No, I don't think so.
I'm taking it all in. I agree with Amber. I think, Jenny, you do a great job in your club. I know Eiley has a blast. I don't notice any struggles with the balance, so I think you're doing a good job. And Amber, I think I know part of it's been with just numbers and things, and COVID has really affected, I think, many club members being able to participate. But I think your club's awesome, and maybe with more numbers and in-person meetings, maybe that'll grow too. Hopefully this year. I know I'm going to try to encourage our club to be more aware of the garden stuff. And so I think my struggle is getting members to most of my members come to meetings, but getting them engaged to want to come and participate in meetings. So that's going to be something I need to work on, getting everyone engaged and wanting to come to the meetings.
And again, I think you all do all of you guys that are on here do a fabulous job. So say that right off the bat, because I think you're doing amazing things. And I totally understand the things you're saying, because it is hard. I struggle with it myself, with the program as a whole, getting frustrated, wanting to offer things and then no one shows up or whatever. Like, and an example being the Clover Gaming. I just canceled it because I didn't have anyone, bite. But I'm gonna try it again in a different format. It just isn't. That's probably just not the way it was gonna work for most people. So we're gonna try something different, because it's something that people showed an interest in. People told me they wanted this. So it's just finding the right delivery, and sometimes it's just trial and error. And sometimes it's asking them. So, maybe you just ask your group, hey, I'm struggling with this. I really want to make sure you guys are prepared for this. What ideas do you have to make sure you're ready for what your goals are? And kind of taking the temperature of the group that way. And involving them in how to get there. Because they're not all going to have the same goals, not all of them are going to want to do the same kind of project. It's possible in a project club to have kids that don't even intend to complete, as we like to say. I don't like the word complete, to be honest. But to exhibit a project in that, they just think it's fun and want to, and are interested. And at the I'm sorry, I need to take a drink. At danger of offending my own child, there's a lot of things he's interested in, and that he would come and do, but he's not interested in exhibiting a lot of stuff. He wants to show his goat. That's about it. But he's interested in these other things, and he's interested in learning about them. So, to make that opportunity available to those kids too, right? Or, at the opposite side, right? Maybe they're interested in one thing and they want to do it perfectly, and that's their goal. So just having them, I self-identify where they want to be and helping those kids get there. And Jenny, I think you do a great job. I think that you're getting done what needs to get done. And if anything, maybe just take the temperature of the group, just one day, at your next meeting. Hey, here's where we are. What do you want? How do you want to get there? Do you like what we've been doing? Do you not like what would you do differently? If you were in charge of this group, what would you do differently? And just kind of take the temperature of the group that way.
Okay, that's a good idea. I did that after the fair a little bit through just kind of Facebook posts, but it's probably time to touch base and kind of do that again, and making sure that they're still, kind of wanting to do the things they outlined this summer. So
yeah, and to dovetail off what you just said, because it's going to change, right? They might think they want a certain goal, and especially that those younger kids, it might change. I was having a conversation today about myself as an adult. I'm a visionary. I can see how I want things to be at the end, but how I get there is going to differ on the day. Right. So sometimes it's okay, how are we going to get to that goal today? And it might look a little differently. And I might discover along the way a better way to get there, or a more creative way to get there, because I'm also a creative type person. So I come at it a little differently than somebody who is more concrete about something. So allowing them to have that flexibility is important too. So yeah, just checking in again, I think would be good, and checking in regularly is good.
And I also wondered, is there a way to highlight the project clubs to where leaders of the regular 4-H clubs say, hey, did you know we have a project club for 4-H for cat? They'll teach you how to show your cat. We have a project club for dog. They'll teach you what you need to know, to show your dog. We have one for growing vegetables. You can walk away. Because I think sometimes, I remember before we started dog club, we just had no clue. And it was actually another 4-H'er in our regular 4-H group that said, oh, you have to come to these. We just had no idea how to start. We were a newer family. And
yep. So we just had this conversation in our last 4-H council meeting. A very similar conversation to this. And so what council has asked me to do, like I said, we had a conversation, all of us together, and sort of came to this point where they said, can you do this? And I said, yes, I can do this. So what we're going to do is start a series of, it started out in a conversation of kids don't know what they're supposed to do for different things, right? Just like what you said. So it started out livestock, right? Because we were talking about livestock rules, which anybody that has never done livestock before is just mind blown when they realize all you have to do to show a chicken. Like, seriously, there's a lot to it. So, do a little, I don't want to call them workshops, but almost like a little podcast with Poultry Club. A little podcast with Cat Club, a little podcast with Garden Club, about all the things you do what needs to be done if you want to exhibit that project. Here's what your here are some examples of what your exhibit could look like. Because that's another thing this year. The Indiana 4-H has really is really making an effort to make 4-H much more accessible to everyone. And that means being a little more flexible with things. So, but people still need guidance. People aren't going to just grab a chicken out of their backyard and bring it to the fair and feel comfortable showing that chicken because they've got no clue, right? So you still have to have the guidance. You still have to talk about the rules. You still have to talk about showmanship. So I think doing some of those things, and now that I have some of you guys on here, we're going to do that, and I'll be reaching out to some of you to do some of that. And it might mean coming in here and we'll just kind of have a conversation, like I said, in sort of a podcast format. We might even video record. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. And just show people and talk about what